power is a phantom. It is a whisper in a crowded room that silences all other noise, a shadow that stretches long and imposing from a body that may, in itself, be frail. But when the body is broken, the shadow shrinks and the whispers turn from fear to pity. Pity is the most elegant form of degradation, a velvet glove for a hand of stone, and Kaido Tanaka felt its suffocating weight every moment of every day. He sat in the grand lobby of the Serenity Grand, a hotel he had built with his own 2 hands, a monument to a life that no longer felt like his own. The chair, a throne of chrome and black leather, was his cage. Its wheels were his useless legs, its frame his constant, cold companion. 1 year. 1 year ago, he had strode across this very floor, the polished marble reflecting a man who commanded the world. Now, it reflected a broken king, a crippled tiger, and the gazes that fell upon him were no longer filled with awe, but with a soft, dismissive sorrow that was worse than any threat. The air, once electric with his presence, was now thick with the cloying sweetness of sympathy. The hushed conversations of the wealthy patrons, the averted eyes of his own staff, the careful, wide berth they all gave his wheelchair, it was a symphony of revulsion disguised as respect. He was a ghost haunting the halls of his own empire, a relic on display. His hands, once capable of breaking a man or signing a deal worth billions, now rested inertly on the armrests, the knuckles white with a rage that had nowhere to go. It was a poison that had seeped into his soul, turning everything bitter. He hated the sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows because it illuminated his helplessness. He hated the gentle melody from the grand piano because it felt like a funeral dirge for the man he used to be. He was Kaido Tanaka, a name that once made Tokyo's underworld tremble, and now he was merely an object of morbid curiosity, a tragic story whispered over champagne and canapes. The silence that surrounded him was the loudest thing in the room, a screaming void where his power used to be. The cloying scent of expensive perfume and the sterile chill of the marble floor dissolved, replaced by the raw, bracing smell of salt and fish. He was a boy again, no older than 10, on his father's modest fishing boat off the coast of Izu. The wood of the deck was rough and splintered beneath his bare feet, a world away from the seamless polish of his current prison. His father, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun and sea, whose hands were perpetually calloused from the nets, stood at the helm, his silhouette dark against the rising sun. Kaido had been complaining, his small hands stinging from a rope burn. He had looked at the meager catch of the day, and then at the distant, glittering lights of the city, feeling a familiar pang of shame and ambition. He had asked his father why they had to live this way, why they couldn't have the things the men in the city had. His father had been silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. Then he had turned, his eyes not angry, but filled with a deep, quiet wisdom. He knelt, bringing himself level with his son. "Kaido," he had said, his voice as rough as the hull of his boat, "do not confuse the value of a man with the value of his things. A tool is only as good as the hand that wields it. Money, power, they're just tools. They can build a house or they can burn it down. But the hand is the heart. The strength is in here." He had tapped Kaido's chest gently. "This boat is not who I am. It is what I do. Who I am is a man who provides for his son, who respects the sea, who is true to his word. Your worth is not in what you will own. It will be in what you build inside yourself. That is the only treasure no storm can take away." The memory was so vivid it was painful, a phantom limb of a life of simple clarity. The man in the wheelchair, surrounded by a fortune his father could never have imagined, felt a profound and hollow emptiness. He had all the tools in the world, but he had forgotten the purpose of the hand. The treasure his father spoke of felt like a distant myth, a story told to a boy who had long since vanished. 1 year ago, the memory was a blaze of light, a stark contrast to the gray twilight of his present. 1 year ago, Kaido Tanaka did not sit, he moved. He was a force of nature, a controlled storm in a tailored suit. He walked through the lobby of the Serenity Grand not as a resident, but as its creator, its soul. His gait was confident, his presence a palpable energy that shifted the atmosphere of any room he entered. People didn't avert their eyes, they sought his. A glance from him was a commodity, a nod of validation. His antagonist collective, as he now thought of them, men like Mr. Sato and Mr. Ishikawa, his primary investors and fair-weather partners, would flock to him, their smiles wide and their backs bent in deference. They were vultures who mistook the lion's roar for an invitation to feast. He had always known what they were, but they were useful. They were part of the architecture of his power, the fawning chorus to his epic. But his power then was not merely the brutish authority of a Yakuza boss. He had evolved. He had channeled the ferocity of his past into the sharp acumen of a legitimate magnate. He ran his organization with a strict, albeit unconventional, code of honor. He was ruthless to his enemies but fiercely loyal to his own. He was known to pay for the education of his employees' children, to quietly absolve the debts of a family in crisis, to protect the small businesses in his districts from predatory rivals. He was a paradox, a man of violence who cultivated beauty, a crime lord who enforced a strange and effective peace. He was building something more than an empire of money. He was building a legacy. He believed, then, that he was wielding the tools his father had spoken of to build a magnificent house. He saw himself as a protector, a patriarch. His word was bond, his anger a righteous fire. He moved through this world with the certainty of a man who believed he was the master of his own fate, the sole architect of his destiny. He was strong, he was respected, and he was, he thought, a good man in a complicated world. The irony was a blade twisting in his gut. He had thought his foundation was stone, but it had all been built on sand. The tragic event, when it came, was not a grand, cinematic battle. It was a mundane betrayal, a quiet Tuesday that ended in fire and shattered glass. It was supposed to be a simple meeting, a negotiation with a rising, hot-headed rival faction that had been encroaching on his territory. Sato and Ishikawa had advised against it, urging him to use his influence with the police instead. "You are a businessman now," Tanaka-san, Sato had said, his voice smooth as silk. "Such matters are beneath you." In hindsight, their concern was the first clue. But Kaido, still clinging to the old ways, believed in facing a man eye to eye. He went with only 2 of his most trusted guards. The meeting place was a warehouse in the industrial district, a place of rust and shadows. The air was thick with the smell of oil and deceit. The rival leader was arrogant, but the negotiations seemed to be proceeding as expected. It was on the drive back that the world tore itself apart. A black sedan, one he recognized as belonging to his own fleet, a car he had gifted to Ishikawa for his loyalty, slammed into the side of his vehicle at an intersection they should have cleared 30 seconds earlier. His driver had inexplicably slowed. The world became a kaleidoscope of spinning metal, screeching tires, and the explosive pop of the side windows imploding. The impact was a physical manifestation of betrayal, a force that threw him against the door with bone-shattering violence. He remembered the grotesque angle of his driver's head, the sudden, shocking silence after the chaos, and a searing, white-hot pain in his back that was immediately followed by nothing. A terrifying, absolute numbness from the waist down. He tried to move his legs, to push himself up, but they would not obey. They were just dead weight, foreign objects attached to his body. Through the shattered windshield, he saw 2 figures get out of the other car. Not the rival gang members. It was Sato and Ishikawa's chief lieutenants. They looked at the wreckage, made a brief call, and then calmly drove away. They hadn't come to finish the job. They didn't need to. They knew a caged tiger was no longer a threat. It was a decoration. His empire was now theirs. The last thing he felt before darkness consumed him was not the pain, but the profound, ice-cold shock of being so utterly and completely erased by the very men who had once bowed to him. He was back in the chair, the memory receding like a phantom tide, leaving behind the cold, hard beach of the present. The lobby of the Serenity Grand was no longer a symbol of his achievement. It was the stage for his humiliation. The phantom pain in his back flared, a ghostly echo of the moment his life had been severed in two. His despair was a physical presence, a heavy cloak he could not shrug off. It was in this moment of profound isolation that he saw her.
Sarah.
A single mother, an American woman far from home, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, one of which was cleaning the floors of his gilded cage. He had seen her before, of course, but he hadn't truly seen her. She was part of the background, a silent, efficient cog in the vast machine he had built. Today, however, he noticed the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the quiet dignity in the set of her shoulders as she pushed her cleaning cart. She moved with a grace that belied her fatigue, her movements economical and precise. There was a strength in her he hadn't bothered to acknowledge, a resilience that made his own self-pity feel indulgent and obscene. She never looked at him with pity. She rarely looked at him at all. When she did, her eyes held a neutral, professional respect, nothing more. To her, he was not the fallen king. He was Mr. Tanaka, the owner of the building she cleaned. That simple, unvarnished truth was both an insult and a strange comfort. Just as this thought crossed his mind, he saw them, Sato and Ishikawa, gliding towards him, their faces masks of practiced concern. "Kaido-san," Sato began, his voice a disgusting purr of false sympathy. "It is good to see you out of your suite." "The air will do you good," Ishikawa nodded, his eyes flicking over the wheelchair with a poorly concealed flicker of triumph. "We have been managing things, of course. It is a heavy burden, but we do it for you. To protect your legacy. The word was a hot coal in his throat. They spoke of his legacy, while standing on its grave. He said nothing, his jaw tightening as he gripped the wheels of his chair. The rage was a wild animal clawing at the inside of his chest, but his body was a cage from which it could not escape. He could only sit and endure their performance, the final, galling act of their betrayal. Suddenly, a flash of bright pink cut through the muted tones of the lobby. A small giggle, pure and unburdened, sliced through the heavy silence. Sarah, who had been cleaning near the grand entrance, looked up in alarm.
"Maya, no."
"Come back here." But the little girl, no older than 6, was a bolt of pure, untamed energy. She had her mother's kind eyes and a smile that could disarm armies. Her name was Maya, and she was oblivious to the unwritten rules of this place, the reverence, the fear, the pity. She saw only a man in a fascinating chair, a man who looked sad, a man who sat at her eye level. While the patrons gasped and her mother froze in terror, Maya ran. She ran not with hesitation, but with the joyful, unthinking purpose of a child. She ran straight towards the monster in the wheelchair, the fallen dragon everyone else avoided. Kaido watched her approach, his mind unable to process the event. His entire world had become a fortress designed to keep people out, and this tiny child was charging the gates with a flower in her hand. His body tensed, bracing for an impact he couldn't predict. What did she want? Was this some cruel joke? But there was no malice in her eyes, only a wide, innocent curiosity.
She didn't stop to speak.
She didn't ask what was wrong with him. She didn't stare at his lifeless legs. She simply reached him, wrapped her small arms around his right thigh, a limb he had not felt in a year, and squeezed with all her might. A hug. It was the most simple, profound, and unthinkable act. The contact was a lightning strike to his dormant soul. He could not feel the pressure of her arms through the layers of fabric and dead nerves, but he felt it everywhere else. He felt it in his chest, a sudden, painful cracking of the ice that had encased his heart. He felt it behind his eyes, a stinging heat that threatened to become tears. The entire, opulent lobby, with all its wealth and power, faded into the background. There was only the silent man in the chair and the small girl who had dared to touch the untouchable, to embrace the broken. For the first time in a year, Kaido Tanaka was not an object of pity or a symbol of tragedy. He was just a man being hugged by a child. Sato let out a small, derisive chuckle, a sound like a snake rustling in dry leaves. "How charming," he murmured to Ishikawa, loud enough for Kaido to hear. "It seems he's found his new level." A plaything for the staff's children, that was it. That was the spark. The hug had cracked the ice. Sato's contempt was the hammer blow that shattered it completely. Something ancient and formidable stirred within Kaido. The quiet fury that had been poisoning him from the inside out finally found a voice. He slowly raised his head, and the gaze he fixed on Sato and Ishikawa was not that of a broken man. It was the cold, calculating glare of the leader they had betrayed. The lobby fell utterly silent. Even Maya, sensing the shift in the air, loosened her hug and looked up at him, her large eyes full of questions. Kaido placed a hand gently on her small head, a gesture of reassurance, before turning his full attention back to the two men. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried the weight of his former authority, cutting through the vast space like a shard of glass. "Pity," he began, his tone dangerously soft, "is a currency for beggars." "I am not a beggar," he paused, letting the words hang in the air. Sato's smirk faltered. "You come here and speak of my legacy. You speak of burdens. Let me tell you about burdens. The true burden is not this chair. It is the weight of worthless men who mistake loyalty for opportunity. Men like you," he gestured dismissively at their expensive suits, their shocked faces. "You did not take my empire. You inherited a building. You are not kings. You are squatters in a palace you did not build and do not understand. My legacy was never in the steel and glass of this hotel. It was in the strength and honor that built it. A concept you are both entirely unfamiliar with." He looked from Sato to Ishikawa, his eyes pinning them in place. "So take your false sympathy and your stolen profits and leave my presence. Your business here is concluded." Permanently, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The command was absolute. Humiliated and exposed, the two men stood frozen for a moment before turning and walking away, their retreat far swifter and less dignified than their approach. The quiet power that filled the lobby was more potent than any physical threat he had ever made. Kaido had reclaimed his soul. The silence that followed their departure was different. It was not the suffocating silence of pity, but the clear, ringing silence of respect. The patrons who had been watching the drama unfold slowly returned to their conversations, but their whispers now held a note of awe.
Kaido looked down.
Maya was still standing by his chair, looking from him to her mother, who was now rushing over, her face a mask of apology and fear. "Mr. Tanaka, I am so sorry," Sarah stammered, grabbing her daughter's hand. "She didn't mean, I don't know what got into her. It will not happen again." Kaido raised a hand to stop her. He looked at the woman, truly seeing her for the first time, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, the unyielding strength that held her together. She was not weak. She was a warrior of a different kind, fighting battles he couldn't imagine. Then he looked at Maya, who had shown more courage and humanity than anyone in his entire world. He saw the legacy his father had spoken of, not in himself, but in them. The hand that wields the tool, the heart that gives it purpose. "It is I who should be sorry," Kaido said, his voice softer now, devoid of the hard edge it had held moments before. "Your daughter has given me a gift I thought I had lost forever." He looked directly at Sarah, his gaze unwavering. "You see this hotel? For the past year, it has been a mausoleum. A beautiful tomb filled with empty people. It has no soul." He paused, a new idea taking root, a sudden, clear path forward. "I need a partner. Not an investor who understands numbers, but someone who understands value. Real value. Integrity. Decency." Sarah stared at him, confused. "Sir, I am a cleaner." "Today, you are a cleaner," Kaido corrected gently. "But I see a manager. I see a director. I see the person who can help me turn this place from a tomb back into a home. I am offering you a new position, Sarah. I am offering you the chance to help me rebuild, not with steel, but with spirit." "Your spirit." Sarah was speechless, her mind reeling. It was an absurd, impossible offer, but the look in his eyes was utterly serious. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a partnership, a recognition of her worth that went far beyond her current station. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his old life, Kaido Tanaka began to build his new one. The transformation of the Serenity Grand was quiet but profound. It began not with grand renovations, but with small acts of humanity. Under Sarah's guidance and with Kaido's full backing, the hotel's culture began to shift. The staff were no longer treated as invisible cogs, but as valued members of a team. Wages were raised. A daycare was established on site, a place where Maya and the other children of employees could be safe and happy. The cold, corporate art in the hallways was replaced with pieces from local, undiscovered artists. A portion of the hotel's immense profits was funneled into a new foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers and funding educational programs in the city's poorer districts. Kaido, for his part, was a man reborn. The bitterness that had defined him was replaced by a quiet, focused determination. He was still in the wheelchair, but it was no longer his cage. It was simply his way of moving through the world. He spent his days in his office, not brooding, but working. He pored over plans with Sarah, his old strategic genius now applied to a new, more meaningful purpose. Their meetings were a study in contrasts. The former Yakuza lord in his custom Italian suit and the American single mother in her simple, practical attire, both equals, both architects of a shared vision. A quiet respect grew between them, blossoming into a deep, unspoken affection. He admired her resilience and unwavering moral compass. She saw past his scars and his reputation to the man he was striving to become. He learned to smile again, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, usually prompted by a drawing Maya would bring to his office or a dry, witty observation from Sarah. He was still a man of immense power and wealth, but he was no longer defined by it. He was defined by what he did with it. He was building a house, as his father had said, but this one was for everyone. It was a shelter, a place of warmth and opportunity, a legacy not of fear, but of hope. The shadow he cast was no longer long and imposing. It was wide and protective, offering comfort to those who stood within it. My name is Kaido Tanaka. For most of my life, I believed strength was a fortress. I built walls of money, power, and fear around myself, thinking they would keep me safe. I thought respect was something you could demand, something you could seize. But a fortress is also a prison. When my body was broken, I discovered that my walls were not there to protect me. They were there to isolate me. I was left alone inside my own grand creation, a king with a kingdom of ghosts. The world I had built was a construction of convenience, populated by people who valued my function, not my humanity. When I could no longer function as they required, I ceased to exist. They looked at my chair and saw weakness. They looked at my stillness and saw an ending. They were wrong. My ending was my true beginning. We spend our lives chasing phantoms, status, wealth, the approval of crowds. We measure our worth by what we accumulate, by the height of the walls we build. But true strength, the kind that endures, is not a fortress. It is a bridge. It is not found in what you can take, but in what you can give. It is not measured by the fear you command, but by the love you inspire. I learned this not from a powerful man or a wise philosopher, but from a 6-year-old girl who saw not a cripple, or a monster, or a boss, but just a man who looked sad. In her simple, fearless act of kindness, she reminded me of a lesson my father tried to teach me long ago on a humble fishing boat. Your value is not in what you own, but in what you build inside your heart. This chair does not define me. My past does not define me. The opinions of a world that worships strength and despises weakness do not define me. I am defined by the choices I make now. I chose to tear down my fortress and build a bridge. To all of you out there building your own walls, I ask you this. What are you protecting? And what are you keeping out? The most valuable treasures are often the ones we are too afraid to let in. Do not wait for your world to break to discover what truly matters. True power is not the ability to stand tall over others. It is the courage to kneel and help someone else up.